desde sempre, talvez, eu trabalho com educação. Assim, já no INSPER, o meu estágio foi num instituto que trabalha com educação e segurança pública.
Eu não sabia onde os estudos iam me levar, mas eu sabia que iam me levar longe.
Trabalhei na Fundação Lehman 6 anos, dirigindo, liderando a área de pesquisas, e há 2 anos eu fundei o IED, que é um slogan, Interdisciplinaridade de Evidências no Debate Educacional, que busca levar pesquisas e dados para os tomadores de decisão em educação.
Depois de formada, o meu sonho era entrar no programa de trainee do Itaú, e no segundo ano em que eu estava prestando o processo, eu fui aprovada no trainee especialista do Itaú BBA.
Eu estou terminando o doutorado, em educação. Minha visão é virar professor e contribuir para mudar a academia no Brasil.
Eu estou na fase final do programa de trainee. Agora o meu sonho é ser alocada em uma área que eu goste, fazer uma carreira de sucesso dentro do banco. E meu sonho também é poder adotar alguém como mentora, como madrinha para o programa de bolsas e poder devolver ao INSPER tudo que eu recebi.
Para a gente ter o Brasil que a gente quer, a gente precisa investir na educação. Então hoje não me vejo, acho que é impossível sair dessa área e acho que, na verdade, eu quero trazer mais pessoas para a área porque a gente precisa muito.
Hi, Durão, you're on mute.
Abraço forte e leal, família INSPER. Estamos aqui com o Blade Cotley, professor Blade Cotley do MIT. E óbvio, ele tem um currículo gigantesco, aí quem quiser consultar ele, mas introduzindo rapidamente, professor Blade Cotley, o professor Fábio Dávila, daqui do INSPER, o professor Paulo Amaral, também aqui do INSPER. E a ideia hoje do nosso bate-papo é discutir um pouco da inovação e dos contextos entre Brasil e Estados Unidos. Eu vou passar a nossa conversa para inglês, então acho que a ideia agora, a partir desse momento, a gente mudar para inglês para conversar com o professor Blade. So, thank you very much, Professor Blade. It's a pleasure to have you here, and it's a really, really great honor so that you invited that you accepted this invitation. So, can you tell a little bit more about yourself and explain the amazing things you do?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me on here. I appreciate this. I have an interesting background in that I always wanted to create things for people that enhance their lives. So I, as an undergraduate in college, studied human factors, so engineering and psychology together, and worked for 25 years in industry, where I was working in many different kinds of environments, all technologies, but with a really strong user experience component. So speech recognition technologies in the early 90s or mid 90s, late 90s, over to search and information access technologies. I did a whole bunch of other things since then, whether it's the first social robot for the home, where I ran design for that group, or worked in cybersecurity and a bunch of other things, including startups and big companies. And over those 25 years, I also started teaching. So I've been teaching for the past 17 years or so in total. And that's given me a perspective that's a little bit different. So I've had to suffer working in industry where you have to figure things out and make it work, understand why it's not working and why it does work sometimes. I've also learned the academic side of what should be happening, how things should work based on a bunch of research. I've been able to pull the academics into the industry and the industry experience back to the academics. So I can teach from a position of having done it, knowing what it's like to do these things successfully and to also have failures and to make that work. So it's given me a different perspective on the world. And so a few years ago, I started consulting and really consulting on what I teach. What I teach at MIT is about innovation, design thinking, and leadership, specifically for engineers. In my consulting practice, I help companies and organizations become more innovative because we've developed an assessment, the world's first assessment that assesses innovation on the individual level, the innovation ability on the individual level of each person, and then gives trainings that very quickly, in 2.5 days, enable them to become more innovative. Just right after that time period, they can start applying techniques immediately and then keep growing. So that's what I've been doing.
Well, that's amazing. And maybe for the people who are watching this for the first time and learning now about design thinking and innovation, how could you define what is design thinking and what is innovation, so people can understand a little bit
Sure.
more?
So these terms are kind of funny. Let's start with design thinking. Design thinking is a term coined by IDEO back in the 90s, I think it was. And prior to that, we had user-centered design coming from like the 70s or 80s, became very popular. And these concepts trace all the way back to like the 20s, where people were thinking philosophically about what is it, how do we solve these problems that are complex, that are dealing with situations where there's uncertainty and people. And that's when we start getting a lot of this concept about we need a method, a structured method of solving these kinds of problems. There was a first thing published called Wicked Problems, I think was the name of it. And we see this term being used slightly differently every time. So we have user-centered design because people have forgotten to think about users explicitly. They said, we'll make the solution. You told me what you want, I'll deliver something that does that. It does it, but people don't like to use it, or they're having problems, or they have failures and it's bad. You have to do better. Okay, so we're gonna put users in the center. Then we had design thinking to say it's actually a big encompassing term, not just user-centered design, but thinking about everything around it. And all this really is saying we need a structured way to solve really complex problems and in a way that people don't just know how to do. So we have a method and a procedure that anyone can follow, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. And that's, I think, really what we mean by that term. Now, innovation is very specific, and people use it, they use it around a lot. They say, we want innovation, or I think the Wall Street Journal published something this past year, and it was like top innovators, including Lewis Hamilton, the F1 driver. I'm like, I wouldn't call him an innovator. He might be, but not from what I saw. So when I take a look at this, the term really is very simple. An invention is coming up with something new, and an innovation is creating value from that invention. Now, it could be economic value often, and it's economic value for companies, but it could be safety. If you're a military organization, you create safety, security, certainty, any kind of value you want, as long as you're creating value. And the bigger the innovation, the more value you create in that context with an invention. That's it.
Hi, Blade. I actually have a question to follow up on that. Did you actually see change in culture and in procedure once the companies you worked with started to adopt this design thinking as opposed to only the user-centered approaches? Did you actually see change happening for the real eyes?
It's funny you say that. I don't know if it's a change compared to typical user-centered design. Most organizations, I think, there's just a slight difference, a nuance in the way that we teach it, the way that I think about it, compared to the way that other people typically think about it. People talk when they're training professionals in business who are successful, that they should focus on a few areas and often include things like creativity, like here's techniques for being more creative. And they talk about things like empathy, very big concept. And they focus on users, like here, how do you get to know your users really well? And they work on concepts about interviewing users and things like that. All these are good things to do. I don't focus on them, though, because what made a person who's successful in business, maybe they've been in business for 20 years, if they don't have empathy and they're still successful, I'm not going to teach them how to become more empathetic in 2 days. So I don't focus on that. And creativity there's some very structured definition, which I agree with, which is pretty much what we teach, but often has a sense culturally that you have to be creative. Just an idea comes to you and you can just feel it. And you have to, it has an idea that you're drawing wild pictures and all of a sudden, the inspiration hits. And in that regard, we don't talk about things like that, but we do share techniques to help you. Here's a very structured way of thinking. Here's a way of bringing a team through an exercise in order to maximize that, sure. And we don't talk about users very much. We do, of course, talk about them, but we talk about them at the same weight that we talk about other stakeholders. People forget that having a great idea is good and often can lead to great success. But the reason a lot of ideas at companies, which are great, don't yield successful results is because someone internally at the company blocks it. So that's a stakeholder. Your user is a stakeholder too. So what you didn't get the thing to your users because someone else blocked you. And we focus on that because a lot of times in organizations, they are trying to solve the problem for their users the best they can. And people don't try to block deliberately. They block because they don't understand it or they can't see the value and they haven't communicated effectively enough. So we focus on those kinds of elements a little bit differently. And yes, what I've noticed that companies very quickly and organizations can have a cultural shift right from having the training. They become more aware of themselves, their own limitations. They understand the value of this process because of the way we structure it to be used right away. And they see how leadership skills are necessary to combine with this to be successful in business or in any kind of organization. Without leadership skills, you aren't able to extract the innovation. You need to have
these without changing managers. And so the training is across the board.
Yes, for us, we'll train from the CEO down to the intern. We think actually we see really good results when you get a mixed group from senior level, mid-level, and junior level people together. That mixed group is a very important thing because then senior people can see how someone who's very junior can come up with an idea that's very effective and can attack the process slightly differently. And a junior person can see what a senior person says and how they understand the process a little bit differently as well. And then they all align around the fact that you need to have this ability to come up with an idea, test it out, iterate on the idea. You're expected to challenge results. You're expected to ask questions. You're expected to iterate. That builds up really psychological safety in the kind of truest sense of the word in terms of how we mean as an academic environment. Psychological safety is exactly that sort of definition.
If I may add a question here, Professor, it's an honor to have you here. My question is, we are talking to students like 20 years old, and they are probably going to face 50 years ahead of them. So my question is, what would you suggest to the students who are initiating their careers about how they should deal with the transformations that technology will inevitably bring to their jobs? The context of this question came in a conversation with a psychologist, 25 years old, and how their job, and you have some experience in that field as well, how can they prepare to survive in the worst case scenario, or to take advantage, or even better, to lead this transformation, given that they're going to work for 50 years, and no one can imagine the transformations they're going to have in 50 years.
Yeah, it's a great question. That's a great question. Here's how I think about that. Things don't really change that much. Some things change a lot, but the underlying things don't change much. So, we've had one fundamental massive shift in our lives, which is the smartphone, and specifically the iPhone, because we have this intersection that happened. It was an amazing moment of data. You can get data from anywhere. You have so you have mobile technology now. You have the processor and the screen, everything else. So you have this incredible interface that can shift and change. You have an interaction which is very, very natural and directly manipulative. And the iPhone, because of the iPhone's invention, it shifted hours of how people spend their lives. In about 2.5 years, we could look at the graphs. That one shift has been the most dramatic shift in the world. And as you see, everything's happening because of that, whether it's Twitter or Uber or Airbnb or Netflix, everything else is shifting because of this kind of technology. Because of that, we need to be sensitive to how you need to, as a student, be aware of how the same thing will happen over and over and over again. Uber is a two-sided marketplace, right? And we have Airbnb, a two-sided marketplace. And so what's happening here? Well, if we look back, we'd look for models. And the model here is this one device, right? This one incredible object that connects people at incredible speeds to each other, like that. And there's organizations centered around that. Now, that's not a new concept, though. We've had two-sided marketplaces in the past. That's called like a real estate agent is a two-sided marketplace. Like, I need a place to live, great. And I need to sell or rent a place. Okay, so it's still the same thing. That model has existed beforehand. What's different now is what this technology enables you to do on top of that, with ratings, things in real time, 3D, VR, all that stuff. So I think the thing is to, as a student, read a lot about different things that are true 100 years ago, and think about how they're still true now. People have underlying needs they're always trying to solve for. How to live in terms of a healthy life, how to have fun, how to learn, how to be loved, how to control their environment, how to understand their environment. Like, it's some basic things that people do. And so philosophy, psychology, things like that are really important for students to learn about, because the underlying things don't change. If you can take classes that share concepts about certain kinds of models, business models, like, what a platform is, a technological platform, what that means, or understanding two-sided marketplaces, things like that. Those kinds of simple models, once you understand them, you can see them everywhere. And I think that for a student to be prepared for the future, it's the changes there might be lots of things happening, but at the core, things don't change too much over time. And I think that by focusing on the core, by challenging the underlying assumptions built into everything that they see, they're going to see the patterns repeat themselves over and over again, and look for those repeating patterns. Particularly after you've been out of school for about 25 years, you'll see the pattern happen several times, and you're like, oh, that was the same kind of thing that happened 20-something years ago, but a little different, and now I'm doing it again. In 2000, they were doing, delivery services because it was .com, and people had exuberance, and they said, yeah, we'll just deliver things, and there'll be no fee for it. And you want a candy bar, we'll bring it right to your door. We're like, wow, I can type something into my computer, and we want a compact disc and a candy bar and some popcorn. It just came. But the business didn't work because they couldn't figure out how to make it make sense economically, and then the .com bust and everything failed. What's happening now? Delivery services are back. And are they successful? I don't think they're economically successful. So what do they do instead? Maybe they're selling data, maybe doing something. I don't know what they're doing, but it's a tough business, but it's back. So the cycle repeats itself. So if you saw what happened the first time, you're prepared better for the next cycle. It's just like disco. If you take a look at The Killers, one of their albums, I think their second album, has a lot of disco sounds to it, because it's going to keep coming back.
Absolutely. I really like this idea of understanding history to actually see where we are, because often as students, we know that we think everything is solved. And then once you start to actually see what's underlying, we see we're only scratching the surface, and actually that's the source of innovation, right?
Yes.
But, as an educator, we're always thinking about teaching methods and trying to help the students to learn how to learn. So that's a motto that's often used.
Yes.
But often we don't know all the key ingredients to actually, for example, creating psychological safety, not only in companies, but also for the students who want to innovate, to actually have this confidence and then to follow on this path. So in your experience, do you know, you have some key methods that could be also used in a teaching context as opposed to in a company context?
In a teaching context to help students gain more confidence?
Yeah, and have this psychological safety to actually go on and be prepared to take the challenges they will face.
Yeah, well, so psychological safety, we'll break it down in a couple of different categories. I think I believe, and I teach for this, there are three components of that yield a successful innovation environment. The first one is having the skills to be innovative. So that means I understand a design process, a research, design, test, iterate, and I have some depth and understanding of some of the elements there. And along with that is the leadership skills that you need to be able to have that design process be able to be executed completely. I think there might be some noise going from your environment. There we go. Thank you. Having the ability to execute that design with others. That's the leadership skills of advocacy. How do you advocate for your idea in a way that's effective? Not just tell someone about it, but advocate. Okay, that's the first thing. It's the skills. You need some skills. The second thing is you need the confidence to use the skills. So I might have learned how to do it, and I might have done it once. Am I confident that I can be successful? I do it at work, for example, if I do it tomorrow, if I do it when I'm planning a birthday party. The more you do it, the more you develop some confidence. And that's the second component. So you need confidence, because we know that, and we call it self-efficacy. The more you believe you'll be successful with things like being innovative or being an entrepreneur, there's a super high correlation that you will actually be more successful. So self-efficacy is really important. And the last component is psychological safety, and that's a group thing. That's in my context of my group. Is it okay to challenge results? Is it okay to ask questions? Is it okay and expected? I'm going to iterate towards a solution. I don't need to know the answer at the beginning. If it is, I have psychological safety. And if a really talented, successful person goes into the wrong team that doesn't believe that, the psychological safety goes way down. And so that's the question. Do you have the leadership skills to then bring it back up or not? And that can be very hard at the beginning. But those are the three components. You need to have some basic skills, the confidence to use them in an environment where it's good to be used. And that's why I never think students could graduate and join an environment just because it pays a lot or because it's prestigious. They got to go with a group that they want to actually be with, where they feel like they can be their best selves. And people say you should be with a group so you can grow more. There's different kinds of growth. Some growth is, that was really bad, and I learned what I don't want. That's useful, but don't do it for too long. The other growth is, I can be successful and grow to become better because there's psychological safety in that environment.
So you said a lot about psychological safety. That's really, really important. So regarding that, I have two small questions. One is, how can we teach the students who basically are teenagers or going into the adulthood in the beginning of college or in the end of college, I don't know. How can we teach them to have this psychological safety because they are really shy? And how can, they share a lot with their colleagues, but they don't want to be mocking or something like that. And the second one is basically regarding your other question, is Professor Christensen from Harvard had this concept of job to be done.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that that's the idea you were talking about? And do you think we have a lot more to be discovered? What is your opinion about that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's go to the first one. What was the first part of the question? It was
about how can we teach students? Yeah.
So there's two things. Students will develop psychological safety in an environment where they feel like they're supposed to do these things, but that's not enough. What I think you're really talking about is courage, having courage. That is a skill. To have courage is a skill. So when I was a child, I asked my mom a question. I don't know, I was 4 years old or something. Maybe I was 5. And I wanted to know something about, did that toy store have the toy or something? I don't know what it was. She said, call them. I'm like, call them? Yeah, call them. I was so anxious, nervous to call them. And then eventually I called them and nervously and it was okay. And then the next time I called, I was a little bit less nervous and eventually I became fine. And then I called way too many things. I gained confidence because I was courageous to do the thing I was too anxious to do. Did it anyway. What I think has happened now, because of this one magical device, is that people don't want to have conversations. They don't want to talk. They will text. They'll look at their phone, but they won't have a conversation. And I think because of that, it's really bringing down people's ability to develop courage because they often hide behind their communications. And to be able to communicate an unpopular opinion is important, but just to be able to communicate and say, I'm thinking this, or I've got a question for you. Or in a classroom, when a teacher asks a question, to say something is really, really important. And that's a skill that comes back to a student. I don't know that a teacher can make students feel more courageous, except by cold calling on them, write their name, you have their names right in front. You said, Susan, what do you think? And when Susan says something that's really off base, you say, not quite, and thank you for contributing. And they get points for contributing. It's like, great. They can say, I don't know. I did get a note from a student's advisor saying, the student told me that you cold call the students. And she's very anxious about that and doesn't want to be cold called. I'm like, well, what you expect me to remember? First of all, there's 90 students. I'm not gonna remember which one it is. I'll try, but I probably won't remember. And I won't remember at the moment when I'm in the middle of teaching and when I want to get different opinions. But the student, you could arm them by telling the student to say, I don't know. Let me think about it. That'd be a fine response. And also, I'm very nice about it. So I'm not going to be, you have failed because you didn't do it. So you have to build a little bit of that up as a teacher. But students can't be sheltered. and they shouldn't shelf themselves. So if it's a student who's listening to this, if you are anxious about being cold called in class, then you should tell the teacher to call on you, because then you won't be anxious. You'll be like, okay, I told the teacher to call on me. If they call on me and I don't know, I'm just going to say, I don't know the answer to that one. And you're going to be thinking, but you'll have the courage to say that, and you'll realize it's okay to say that. But that comes down to, I think, a lot of these things where people, students getting on the phone with a student, or having a 20-year-old make a phone call. It's a very stressful thing for them. They should do it more often and develop that courage. That's what students need to have courage. As far as Clay Christensen's Jobs Be Done framework, so I think it's an interesting framework, but I don't like the way it's used. How about that? So they did some analysis. They said, look, what's the job be done of a Dyson vacuum cleaner versus the job be done of a different kind of vacuum cleaner? And they concluded that people think that the job be done is really about, if I'm rewarding myself after a big project, house renovation, I get the nice vacuum cleaner to reward myself. And there's some interesting things where they ask some people, what's the job be done? And people can kind of think in a different perspective. Oh, that serves its purpose. That can be useful. It's a useful technique for getting people to think from a different perspective, to see things from a different perspective. I think that's where it's useful. But I think people use it as a crutch to describe something that happened in the past, but doesn't give them information about the future. So I think there's a good aspect about saying to a person, what would you describe what's that job? What job does it do for you? And they tell you something because they can think a little bit differently. But I don't like the way people use it to say, if the job be done for that thing was that, then we're going to make this thing this job, and we're going to make it work this way. I don't think it works that way at all. But I do think that you have to understand what makes the thing the thing. What makes a fork a fork is a tough question to answer. If you said to someone, what makes a fork a fork? Because when I tell you to pick up the fork, you never pick up the knife by accident. You never pick up a spoon by accident. You know what makes a fork a fork. Well, they'll say it has, these things. They're called tines. I said, great. So if I have two tines, is that a fork? I said, well, yeah. So I'll draw a picture of these two tines like that far apart. And they're like, oh no, you'd have a handle too. Okay, now I draw a handle, and the tines need to be closer together. How close? Like this close? No, they need to be far apart. Okay, so we start getting into how far apart and close. How many? One doesn't work because the food can spin. Two keeps it from spinning. What's the job be done? You can translate food in space. I can pick it up and eat it from different perspectives, right? A spoon doesn't do that. You move the spoon and things fall. Forks do a lot of things, but when you get down to it, it's like, well, each tine has to be not too wide, but not too narrow. If we don't know what makes a fork, how do we know what makes a cell phone a cell phone? Like, these are things that you have to really understand with some depth to them. And I think that it is really important to think about what is the underlying human need that this thing addresses, and then in what context. So if I ask Alexa to play some music, what need is it addressing? Well, it's a need for me to control my environment. I need to control my environment. Remote controls, speech, buttons, whatever. I control my environment all the time, right? And in this case, the context is using voice and music. In that context, I'm controlling my environment, right? So if you understand the underlying need you're trying to solve for, then you can start projecting out. Okay, well, it's music with voice. I could shift it to become news with voice, or I could shift, instead of voice, with a keypad or with buttons or something else to get the music to start. So I'm thinking in a structure, a more architectural way.
So I'm thinking about what you just said about the voice commands and this area where you have been a pioneer in different roles. And I'm now thinking in terms of research and how it often helps inspire people to be on the beginning of something and then to see something grow. And then my question is, how do you see the importance of basic research for institutions who want to innovate? It's something that's often downplayed as opposed to more applied research. You see that in grant funding and calls, and But do you see as a fundamental thing for an institution to want to have a sustainable long-term innovation culture to also have basic research?
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic research is super important. What basic research really is getting down to the core of what makes a fork a fork. And that's, in whatever environment you're talking about, whether it's material science or user experience, it doesn't matter. But whatever you're thinking about this, like, what makes the thing? How does it really work? What's happening at the atomic level? What's happening at the human level with psychology, or whatever it happens to be? You need that, because insights that come from that propel higher order insights, applied research, propel higher order abilities to make a product that changes the way people live their lives in the world. So you need to have all three. If you just start taking what exists and recombining it this way, that's not useful. It doesn't tell students what to do. It doesn't create an environment that grows over time, because you're just mixing and matching existing things. It's like making what's called like a quilt, right? Like I have a few pieces of material, I stitch them together. That's fine and it's good, but for an institution, you need to get back down to the essence. You need all three levels there. And I think students need to be aware of that, because every time they want to do an innovation, they have to, in their own way, think about the basic elements of what makes something special. Every company does this that's successful. I mean, particularly a company like Apple, for example, they're going to do something, they're going to get down. They one time when they came out the watch, they had a video they made about the watch materials, and they made a gold watch. And they said, our metallurgists basically took gold and made it more gold. And they cooked it to gold, took it apart, all the stuff that wasn't gold in gold, they put different stuff in to make it more scratch resistant and stronger. And that's amazing. They're like, we made gold better. Okay, get your head around that. They're doing that in a very quick way, though, that becomes, in the hands of customers. But even, Apple was taking a look at things in 1987, they come out with a video called Knowledge Navigator about this guy that has basically an iPad, looks different, with a big giant camera lens on it. And he's talking to this figure that's on the computer, and he's doing a video call and all this stuff. 87. So think about all the basic research they're doing at Apple and leveraging university stuff, everything that's happening that they can do in order to come out with an iPhone in 2007. That's years before that. So I think that institutions need to be able to do that, and it's really important.
Professor, how companies, especially the ones outside the tech space, and some of them in desperate need of a digital transformation, or at least a digital migration, can attract talents or raise capital in a scenario in which the general perception is that you can only find good jobs in the tech space? Right. And a good example of that is the very high demanding market for software engineers and developers, sure, which also became a global market after the pandemic.
Well, there's a lot into that question. I mean, so you brought the term digital transformation. This is an important term. And I'll make it clear for students. When people were talking about this term recently, and I kept thinking a few years ago, I'm like, why are we talking about digital transformation? Haven't we been doing that since the ATM came out in the 60s? I think it was 1968 in London. Barclays had the first ATM. I didn't even think there was a PIN code. I don't know what they did, but that's been digital transformation constantly. Well, what people realize now is that there are certain processes they want to make more digital. Okay, a lot of it is actually called robotic process automation, and basically you're saying what people do currently with their whatever systems they use, we're going to take people out of the equation and we're going to make it all automatic. And the trouble is, it's cumbersome. It often breaks because the rules aren't fully understood about what people do, and they make these systems, and that's something that's not very valuable, unlike real digital transformation. And real digital transformation is using these technologies now, like, understanding IoT devices better, 3D printing, machine learning technologies, combining those in really interesting ways that fundamentally shift the business. So for example, if you're an airline and you need parts for your airplane because something breaks, you can't store all the parts for all the different configurations of all the planes in your airline in your warehouse. You just don't have all the space for that. So what do? You call up the company to order a part. And there's a lot of assumptions baked into how this has to happen that people haven't challenged for a long time, because a company who knows about aeronautical engineering makes this part, and it's expensive to make the part because the tooling is expensive to manufacture it. And then they ship the part to you. That takes a while to manufacture and ship, and for you to get it into the plane. Okay. Robotic process automation doesn't help there. Maybe it speeds some things up. But true digital transformation means I want to have that part in my plane right away. I don't want it to be shipped over because that takes too long. And I don't want to have to store all the various parts. So I'm going to manufacture them on site in a little small building. How do I do that? 3D printing for aerospace engineering. And now they can do it. Now that requires lots of data, lots of technologies, a lot of ability to make sure you can make high quality parts there. But all of a sudden, you fundamentally shift the way that company does business. That is digital transformation. Now, every organization, but every sector will go through this digital transformation, no matter what it is. Some a little bit more aggressively at the beginning than others, but it doesn't matter what industry you're getting into. But as we become more knowledge workers and more technologies being leveraged for this, yes, you can be a software engineer, you could be a hardware engineer, you can be a psychologist, you could do a whole bunch of things in any kind of organization. But every company is going to go into a stronger environment where the organization fundamentally shifts or needs to shift because someone else will take the business away from them if they don't. But every industry will do this. So I think that students can go into any industry they want to and should, because they're attracted to the industry, but they should be attracted to the opportunity in front of them to have a certain kind of impact. And if they want to have impact because of having better green technologies, or they want impact because they want people to feel better about themselves, whatever it happens to be, they should go into those. But they will all need to understand how these technologies will transform every industry.
And in regarding how the company can attract these talents, what do they need to project to the students, to the talent out there?
Yeah,
to bring them in.
It's a great question. The company needs to be honest with the students, because a company that is really wanting to do digital transformation, no matter what they're in, they will say, yes, we're in an industry that looks boring. I don't know what that industry is. I don't want to make fun of any one industry, but let's say, insurance doesn't seem very exciting. I'm sure it is exciting if you're in insurance. I don't know a lot about insurance. So if you're in insurance, I apologize. But it doesn't seem very exciting, maybe to some students. Maybe to me it wouldn't be. But if they said, look, we want to do digital transformation in our insurance industry, because we want to revolutionize the way insurance is done, they're going to already have a strategy in place, share the strategy with the student. That would be very exciting, because the students don't have to be attracted to, a shiny object. Students are smart enough to know that if you work at a really exciting sounding company, but a really boring job, it's going to be way worse than with a boring sounding company, but with a really meaningful job. And so they need to share their strategy. But most organizations that say they want to do digital transformation or they want to change the industry, they don't necessarily know how to do it. They want to do it, but they don't really feel it. And if they don't have a good strategy in place, then whatever they're representing to the student won't be very exciting. So I think that the way they attract students is by openly sharing their strategy and by coming up with a really good strategy. I've seen companies like John Deere. When I first thought about tractors, I thought, oh, that sounds kind of boring. And I learned about John Deere. I'm like, wow, you're super cool. They innovate constantly, and they're an amazing company. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I would want to work for them, because they really care about the innovation. So I think when I've seen this happen so many times, where a company that sounded like an old brand or an old thing that I wouldn't find interesting, when I find out what they're actually doing, it's very, very cool. And other companies that sound really cool, and I find out what they're actually doing, I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound very fun at all. Where's the fun part? No, that sounds like suffering.
Well, now to connect, this topic to the previous one we talked, I want to know what's your experience on actually having diversity in companies. This is a very important topic in
Sure.
Brazil because we also are a very diverse society, and of course there's a lot of attention on that nowadays.
Yes, there is.
And in your experience, do you actually see that actually being a factor that does improve ideas generation and then maybe even representing stakeholders within the own company without necessarily having to experiment so much with users early on in particular?
Yeah.
In your experience, do you see that? Then does that also provide a little bit of psychological safety for people who otherwise could be uncomfortable being like in real minorities?
It's a great question. It's a great question. Now, I'm going to answer this pretty completely if I can, because it's a hot topic, and I think it's an important one. Do you get benefit from having diverse experiences, having a team with diverse experiences? Absolutely. The most important diversity is diversity of thought, I believe, in a team trying to innovate. Now, where does that diversity of thought come from? It can come from a personal experience. They come from the fact that you grew up in a certain environment, come from the fact that you were a minority of some sort that we've identified, or it could be something else. There's a lot of things that give diverse experiences to a group. And you don't always, there's no one person with one identity represents the whole group. Because there's lots and lots of nuance here. And so does diverse backgrounds enhance innovation? Absolutely. Does only if the diverse backgrounds contribute to diversity of thought. Does it bring up psychological safety? No, I think it lowers psychological safety because people are afraid to say things for fear of offending someone in the group. So it actually reduces psychological safety at times. Like, I want to challenge that result, and someone says, you can't challenge that because I'm representing that group. And that's what's happening a lot in environments. It can happen a lot in environments. So it can be tension provoking for someone because they don't want to challenge someone about their experience. Not about their experience, about what they're representing, what they believe. So it can be difficult. And it requires people to actually know how to work better and communicate better, requiring more courage again. So diversity of thought is important, and you will get that from diverse backgrounds as well. It's really critical that you can do that, but there's another side of this, which is you can't have every human being on your team. You can't have everyone represented on your innovation team. They can't be that big. So at what point do you start bringing it down to say, well, here's what we do need, what we don't need? Now, if you were developing a product and you have no appreciation for the groups of people you're developing it for, you need to learn. Now, you can learn by bringing someone in, or you can learn just by doing research there. If I have to develop a product for someone in Brazil, I've never been to Brazil. I don't know what it's like. I don't speak Portuguese, so I can't. I don't know.
Try.
I'd like to try. I'm going to start with music. I think what's it? Gilberto Gil.
João Gilberto Gil.
Yeah,
as
okay.
well.
So I'd start there. But I don't know I don't know what it's like to be there. Now, if I was making a product for a Brazilian environment, I would probably want to hire someone, bring it onto my team, because they're going to know about the cultural experiences there a little bit. They won't know everything, though. And they might make mistakes the way that I'd make mistakes if I launched a product in the US, where I didn't realize that some group of people didn't understand this or like this. I need to have that kind of understanding. It's important because it's explicitly made for them. But what if I don't have someone who's left-handed on my team and we're developing a product that you use? We might make a mistake and we're going to learn from it by iterating over time. Or I can realize that I have a checklist in my head. Does it work for right-handed and left-handed people? Does it work for colorblind people? That's a big one people forget. But once you build up a certain set of skills, I don't need to have a colorblind person on my team. There are tools I can use and guides and best practices, so I can learn about that, right? Eventually, as a team, we grow our knowledge, but we're never, ever going to be complete. So do I need to have people on my team from those groups? Maybe, depending on what I'm doing. Will diverse opinions enhance our ability to come up with more ideas that are valuable? Certainly. But where do those ideas come from? It's diversity of thought, and your experiences can contribute to that, but not just your experiences that you've had because of your background. So I think that it's depending on what you're doing, you can choose your mix. Because I mean, how big is a team that's going to innovate together? 5, 10, 15 people, 20 people who are really leading the innovation? That's not many people. That's not enough diversity of human beings to get representational samples there. That's okay. You can create things, and then you learn by giving it to lots of people and asking what their thoughts are and observing them and doing ethnographic research. And then you iterate and you iterate and you iterate. To be aware that you may not make, as a guy, a successful product for a woman, to be aware of that is important, because then you could say, I'm going to launch it. I'm going to ask you what you think about it. They'll say, I don't like it for this reason. Like, oh, I never thought about that. Well, then let me make it better. I think it's by having the openness to be ready to make those changes. No one expects you to get it right out of the gate, but to be willing to make the changes that you think are valuable and necessary, because you're willing to open your ears and your mind to different experiences that are relevant and valuable.
Professor, in the courses that you teach about innovation, what is the single most relevant concept that your students must acquire, and what do you do to make sure they get it?
The most important thing is to have students challenge the underlying assumptions of everything. Students at great universities like MIT and Tufts, where I've taught, and every other place I've seen, they got there because they were very, very, very good at doing a few things. Often they were very good at taking a problem that was given to them and solving it. So when they were kids, they might have said to their math teacher, why are we learning to find the area of a circle? And maybe the math teacher gave them a good answer, but most of the time they didn't. And they probably weren't trained to challenge why they were learning something. Instead, what they got is homework. And they did so well in their homework, they got good grades. Because they got good grades, they moved to more advanced material. Because they did so well at that, they got into a good university. And at the good university, their freshman year, they were given a problem to solve. And they solved it. And they got good grades again. And they went up all the way through until they took on harder and harder challenges. And they went into business. And their first job out of school, what do? Well, we'll give you a problem to solve. And they go, great. And then they solve it. They did so well, they get a promotion after 8 months. But in this process, a lot of people don't challenge why they're doing what they're doing. And if you don't challenge the underlying assumptions built into this, you won't innovate. You'll just be good at solving problems that were given to you. So the most important thing we work on is challenging the underlying assumptions in everything. Look at cameras. If you look at a big camera, what's the assumption? That you have to look through this little viewfinder and put this camera to your head, and I turn my head this way, like I have to turn my head. Why? Because my nose is in the way. I can't put the camera here. My nose is in the way. Because old cameras had film, and the film had to be on a flat plane. And so I couldn't put my face that close to the camera. But new cameras don't have to do that. I could have a cutout for my nose, and I could bring it in. There's a lot of ways you can get around that with a new camera with digital technologies, but we don't do that. And when you start challenging all the assumptions about making a better camera, you become a company like GoPro, who's innovated tremendously, continuously. Everyone said, GoPro, they're gonna make a few GoPros and they'll be out of business. But they keep staying in business. How? Well, GoPros, people use selfie sticks, and you see the camera looks back. They said, there's an assumption that the image has to have everything that was in the image, like a selfie stick. They said, let's erase that. And you have a video of people who are doing things like snowboarding, and it looks like there's a camera following them because they've digitally erased the selfie stick. That's incredible. And if you don't know how to challenge the underlying assumptions in everything you do, you can't innovate. So we work on practicing that skill to give problems and then see if they challenge it naturally or not. And then we give them more opportunities to have problems given to them to see if they challenge it. This is the most important skill to learn if you want to innovate.
I absolutely agree. And coming from a scientific background, this is absolutely quintessential for science.
Yes.
And I also like the title of our event today, which is Life is Innovation.
Yes.
And I see it in many ways, what this is. Because I'm actually a biologist, so I'm very interested in evolution and see how nature creates solutions to problems that we, for example, here in an engineering school are always looking at. But I feel that sometimes, we don't step back
Mm-hmm.
and then give room for creativity to actually observe nature. And my question is, maybe as a cliche question, but if you look at, how fast-paced things are nowadays and how much time we spend looking at screens, do you think it's important to have also, as teachers and companies, giving space for people to actually stop and think, and maybe even having a time of creative leisure outside of those creative spaces within the company? So how do you see that as an actual actionable?
Yeah. I think you said a few words that you said, to give people the opportunity. And I think it needs to be more than that. You need to require and create the opportunity for that to happen. You need to actually create the experience. So, there used to be a lot of kind of corporate events where people would have a trip to a climate, a warm place if you're in a cold place or something else, and you're all together and you do activities over the course of the day, and people are expected to be off their phones and stuff like that. And then they have dinners and people talk at the dinner table, and they have drinks and food. And then you have COVID that comes and everyone's like, well, we're not meeting in person anymore. And it's coming back now. Conferences are coming back. If you're at a conference and you are getting something meaningful out of it, you're attending the sessions, you're listening, you're being quiet, you're not on your phone, you have to absorb the material. And if you're responsible for recording it so that you can say, here's what I learned at the conference, you have to network with people and say hi to people, having courage to say hi to strangers and talk with them. And then you have dinner with people and you're connecting and you're thinking about objects, you're talking about ideas and you're talking about the concepts that you experienced. All of a sudden, you're not on your phone anymore. You are having an opportunity to let those thoughts kind of go in the background and to bring some other thoughts to the foreground. And that's really, 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 really valuable. And so I think companies need to create that. And they can do it by having internal conferences. We're like, yeah, we're all going to be having a conference. It's going to be at this hotel down the street. They'll be from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Then we have drinks and we have dinner. And they make the conference fun and interesting for people to go to. And they make the sessions educational, different perspectives from different people. Companies do this used to do this all the time. But by doing that sort of event, people internally can think differently and communicate with different people than they would normally because they're going to be recombined in different sessions. And having dinner where it's even more relaxed, that's really, really important. And they're off their screens and they're off thinking about the thing that needs to get done today. They need to think about more long-term ideas. And this is when you have people come in and show an environment about what's happening in these trends. If you're trying to figure out what kind of food to serve on an airline, that the companies that provide the food will give you a trend report. Here's what's important about food in the world. Here's what people are doing about food in the world. Here's how we can map to those trends that people value who are flying first class or business class or something else. And those trend reports are very illuminating. And they get a lot of information distilled for them in a valuable way. They take the time to think differently. I think that kind of stuff can be really, really valuable. Any corporation can do it. It's pretty easy to do. And the long-term return is so valuable. People like the environment better. They like getting to other people, that they work with differently. They are still thinking about work, but in different ways. So it doesn't feel like it's, like they're doing something that's they might be uncomfortable with, where they're trying to do bonding exercises and I don't want to do that sort of bonding thing. But they're actually bonding because they're talking about some ideas that relate to their work that they all agree to come to because that's what they do for work. And then have time to get to know each other socially a little bit differently without communicating like this.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor. We are getting into the end of this webinar. I'm sorry, it has really great, interesting points. I could keep going for 2 or 3 hours. That is really awesome. Maybe we can do that another time, or maybe we can discuss a little bit more about all the ways to collaborate between our university and your company or even MIT.
Yes.
So that's really great. I would thank very much Fabio and Paulo for their presence here,
Yes.
and for the questions. Was really great questions. And I also would like to thank the Innovation Hub from our university, from INSPER University, that is seeking for these opportunities to connect really amazing people like you, Professor Blade, and the students and the people from the university around. So if you'd like to say something in this end, feel free to add any comments you want to.
This is I love this sort of thing, to be able to connect the dots to different kinds of students and different people, different universities, different environments. The last thing I think I may leave you with is, often people who aren't living in, in Silicon Valley think, oh, I can't innovate that much because I'm geographically somewhere else. And I was talking to some kids up in Wales, and they're like, we don't know if we can really do it. We're so far away from all that stuff that's happening, or they think they need money. We don't have much money. There aren't any barriers anymore. If you can watch this thing because you have a computer in front of you, you have everything you need. You just need the skills, and you can learn a lot of skills online as well. But you have some leadership skills and some skills for being able to be a good innovator and inventor, and together that will shift your ability to execute. You can do it anywhere in the world. The limits are so low now that if you want to make it happen, you can make it happen. And I love being able to work with people in different environments for them to realize that they have within themselves all this incredible talent that they can unleash if they want to.
I think that's a great ending.
Thank you. It's a real honor to speak with you all. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Luis, for opportunity.
So guys, if you are watching after a while this video, so click here in the subscribe button, and also we have the captions if you don't speak a little English. So add the captions here so you can enjoy this conversation. It's a pretty good conversation. So thank you very much, Professor Blade, and talk to you soon, I hope.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Blade.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. I guess that worked.
I think that worked.
It's work. Thank you, Blade.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Victor.
Will there be a link that comes out that I can?
I'm sorry. Wait a moment.
Tem link para ele, mandar para ele?
No, my audio is too low.
I'm sorry.
Oh, will there be a link for this?
Yes.
Great, fantastic.
Wait a moment.
Great job, Blade. Really was really impressed with some of the ideas that actually I thought that you would go another way, and you went to a way that was actually much better than expected. And I shared some of the thoughts with you as well. So it was a great time. I had a great time.
I'd love to, any feedback you have, I'd love to hear about it for sure, because it's.
No, I think it was